This annual bodybuilding championship was absolutely mind-blowing. 6 muscle-bound beasts took to the stage to showcase their perfect physiques. Mark, the clear favorite to win, set the crowd into a frenzy the moment he stepped onto the stage. Not only is he incredibly talented, but his father is the legendary champion Old Jack. The audience was packed with Old Jack's die-hard fans. Although Old Jack is now elderly, his presence is still overwhelming. His greatest wish is for his son to inherit his championship title. After an intense competition, Mark won the championship without a doubt. When the judges came up to award the prize, Old Jack excitedly rushed up to hug his son, but no one noticed that danger was approaching. In the blink of an eye, the fire department and police arrived at the chaotic scene. Mark and his father were surrounded by an angry crowd on the stage. It turned out that the liquid that had flowed out when the trophy had scratched Mark's arm was actually silicone implants. Old Jack, the fraud, had been cheating all along by injecting fake muscles. This completely enraged the entire audience. Old Jack's lifetime of honor was destroyed in an instant. What broke his heart even more was that this scandal would ruin his son's career. As soon as the paramedics finished bandaging Mark, he was surrounded by an angry fan mob. The police had to use a megaphone to warn the crowd not to interfere with law enforcement. Finally, Mark made a decision that shocked the entire crowd. He violently threw the championship trophy he had just won onto the ground. This action spoke louder than any explanation. Just as Mark shattered the trophy, a delivery truck was heading toward Emily's house. The delivery man, Mike, brought Emily a bouquet of flowers. Emily thought it was a surprise from her boyfriend Mark. Excited, she called to confirm and eagerly opened the card, only to be startled by a burst of white powder. Terrified, Emily immediately dialed 911 for help. The fire department rushed to the Capitol. Captain Mark, upon seeing the situation, grew suspicious. This could be a biochemical terrorist attack. He ordered everyone to put on protective gear and stand by. Emily was so nervous she was about to cry because the card read, "You're poisoned now." The firefighters sealed off all exits and entrances, carefully collected powder samples for testing, and gave Emily a thorough examination before taking her to the decontamination area. Outside, the lab team was already in position. Everyone in the building lined up to be checked, and the police were working hard to track down the mysterious mailman. The team's examination showed that Emily's vital signs were normal. She had thought it was just flowers from her boyfriend and hadn't given it much thought. She told Mark that she had never seen the delivery man before. Mark reassured her that it was probably just a prank, but they should prepare for the worst. If it was anthrax, it could be treated with antibiotics. But if it was ricin, they were doomed. Just then, a suspicious man came to inquire about the situation. A firefighter recognized him as the delivery man from the surveillance footage. The police immediately arrested him. During interrogation, the man suddenly started bleeding from his nose and collapsed. This unexpected turn of events made everyone tense. They ordered everyone to stay away. Emily fell into despair. Mark continued to comfort her. Just then, good news came from the laboratory. The powder was just ordinary cornstarch. The whole ordeal was a false alarm. Shortly after receiving the report, Captain Jack arrived at the scene and couldn't help but laugh.
Just go, baby!
It was the same couple from last time. The two were buried in cow dung, with only their heads sticking out. The sight was utterly ridiculous. Firefighter Emma finally had the chance to teach that ungrateful couple a lesson. It all started a month ago when the fire department received a call from Judy reporting that her house had been burglarized. When the operator asked for the address, the woman couldn't provide clear directions. It turned out they were living in a mobile home. This was the only property she and her husband Carl owned, and the couple was in the midst of a divorce. Carl had taken the house while she was asleep and was now towing it away. After locating the house, the police immediately dispatched a fire department to assist. At the time, Carl was speeding at 100 miles per hour, towing the house, and was at risk of crashing and killing himself, but he refused to stop. Female firefighter Mary broke the window from a helicopter to rescue them, but Judy's first reaction was to demand compensation for the broken window. Mary warned that there was a 4.5-meter height restriction bridge 1 kilometer ahead and the entire house would be crushed into pieces. Judy refused to leave her property and wouldn't move until Mary said they only had 60 seconds to live. The two were finally pulled out by the helicopter. The tow truck eventually crashed into the overpass and was completely wrecked. Everyone thought the farce was over, but a few days later, Judy sued Mary. Her reason wasn't for the rescue damages, it was because Mary called her a crazy woman. This bizarre couple demanded Mary publicly apologize and use her 500,000 follower account to help them crowdfund 750,000, or else they'd get her fired. After being forced to compromise, Mary's conscience wouldn't let her rest. so she posted a video to confront them head on. "I shouldn't have called you a crazy woman. I should have called you a greedy opportunist. From now on, I'm done with this." Although the captain thought Mary was too impulsive, he still insisted on keeping her on the job. The couple managed to raise 500,000 yuan through Mary's fundraising, but instead of buying a house, they bought a sports car. Unfortunately, they were immediately met with karma. Emma's good intentions nearly got her suspended, leaving the entire fire department fuming. Back to the present. The team doctor, David, checked them and said their vital signs were normal. David then turned around and dumped the mess on the fire department to handle. Jack walked over slowly, deliberately making them soak in the cow dung hot spring longer. Lisa was almost fainting from the smell. She said she had already tasted the cow dung. Johnson was still stubborn, threatening to complain about the fire department's inadequate rescue efforts. Jack sneered inwardly. Even in this state, he was still so arrogant. He explained seriously that they couldn't just pull it out directly. Cow dung weighs between 1,200 and 1,800 pounds per cubic foot. Forcing them out by their arms could risk tearing their limbs. Lisa heard that the rescue would take 2 or 3 hours and broke down crying on the spot. Jack pretended to be kind and suggested, "Why don't I get you some gas masks?" The couple nodded eagerly, but Jack quickly changed the subject, saying it needed approval from equipment manager Emma. At that moment, Emma walked over with a stiff gait, mimicking their earlier expressions. She laid out 2 conditions: first, no complaints, and second, a public apology. Finally, she dropped a harsh warning: "Remember this lesson. Learn to be a decent person before asking for help." Even the cow dung couldn't stand it. These ungrateful ingrates clearly needed to learn some basic decency. Otherwise, who knows when they'd end up in a dung heap themselves. That day, Jack and animal trainer Tom were leading a raging bull out of the truck at the suburban farm. This wasn't an ordinary bull, it was Death Benny, weighing a ton, whose sharp horns had injured 99 people. Suddenly, a red BMW backed up and knocked over a fruit stand. The splash of red directly triggered Benny's nerves. Before the onlookers could react, they were knocked flying. Benny went berserk and charged forward, flipping the red BMW onto its roof. Aunt Lisa was gored by the bull's horns and fell to the ground, unable to move. Old John had just gotten out of the car when Benny collided with him head-on, sending him flying. When the rescue team arrived, the scene was horrific. But the culprit, Benny, had vanished without a trace. Each team member gripped their fire axes tightly as 7 or 8 injured people lay on the ground. Passing between 2 wrecked cars, they discovered Benny stuck in the chassis. Captain Mike first injected him with a sedative, but the sound of the hydraulic cutters once again enraged the beast. Deputy Captain Emma quickly came up with an idea. She swiftly looped a rope around the bull's horns. Finally, they managed to drag the massive creature out of the frame. Meanwhile, 2 mischievous children were under attack by hundreds of crows. Never provoke crows. These black creatures hold grudges for years. They remember their enemies' faces clearly and will attack them every time they see them. But these 2 kids didn't believe it. They saw a crow standing on a scarecrow and completely ignored the adults' warnings. They picked up stones and threw them at it. As a result, in just a few minutes, hundreds of crows swooped down to take revenge. Jesse was knocked down by the crows and the scene was completely out of control. It turned out that today was the school's autumn harvest festival. The teacher had just finished giving instructions when the 2 mischievous children disappeared. The teacher looked up and saw a swarm of crows circling overhead, and was so frightened that he quickly called the police. When the fire department arrived, everyone was hiding in their cars. The warehouse was surrounded by crows, and even the firefighters were stunned by the scene. The team members, fully armed and wearing protective gear, crept toward the warehouse. Suddenly, the captain's name tag fell off, but he didn't dare pick it up for fear that the crows would misunderstand. When they finally managed to get into the warehouse, they found Jess's neck packed to a bloody mess. The team doctor bandaged him while asking what happened. The naughty kid stubbornly said that the crows were possessed. The firefighter exposed the lie, saying, "It has nothing to do with you throwing stones, right?" The female medic warned them that the crows not only hold grudges but also recognize faces. The ones outside are waiting for these 2 troublemakers to come out. The only way to escape now is to disguise Jess by wrapping his entire face in bandages. Another person put on a firefighter's uniform, and everyone was instructed not to make eye contact with the crows. During the evacuation, they were blocked by a crow. The team leader cleverly threw out a oat bar to attract its attention, and everyone finally escaped. On the other side, the rescue mission had just been completed when an ATM in Corpus Christi suddenly started spitting out something more terrifying than money. That day, Jessica went to an ATM to withdraw money, but the machine spit out a note asking for help. She thought it was a prank and threw the note into the trash can. Then Mike came to withdraw money and found another note that read, "Help me." Faint cries for help could be heard coming from inside the machine. Mike thought it was a prank by a TV station and angrily shouted at the air, "Did you guys get permission to film me?" He then tore the note into pieces in anger. Soon after, Emma came to withdraw money, but the machine was stuck and wouldn't dispense the cash. Then a third note appeared, reading, Don't call 911 if you want your money. Emma had no choice but to call the police and say she couldn't withdraw money. The operator was speechless and said she should contact the bank. Why call 911? Emma said nervously that someone was shouting for help inside the machine. It sounded crazy, but there were indeed cries for help. Although confused, the dispatcher sent the fire department to the scene to investigate. When the firefighters arrived, they found that the hinges of the vault door had been welded shut. The police said that the bank had hired a technician to change the locks that morning, but his car was still there and he was nowhere to be found. It was likely that he had been locked inside the vault and his phone was in the car, so he couldn't call for help. The firefighters used an endoscope to look inside and indeed found a person trapped inside. The temperature inside the vault was extremely high, and the poor technician was on the verge of suffocation. The captain quickly used an angle grinder to cut the hinges and then used a crowbar to pry it open with force. The entire vault door collapsed with a loud crash, and the technician, who was barely alive, was finally rescued. Immediately afterward, another distress call came and someone was experiencing the thrill of being buried alive in a pile of corn. This guy had accidentally fallen into the corn pile and felt it was more terrifying than quicksand. The rescue team set up a ladder and rushed to the top of the barn to launch a life-saving operation. The team members shouted at him not to move, as struggling in the corn pile would only make him die faster. These seemingly ordinary corn kernels weigh 725 kilograms per cubic meter. That's equivalent to having 4 refrigerators pressing down on every part of your body. They only had 10 minutes to act. The man was already having difficulty breathing, but pulling him out directly would tear his body in half. The team members surrounded him with barriers to prevent the corn from moving and turned on the grain suction machine to frantically suck out the corn. Just as they were about to succeed, a female team member's safety rope suddenly snapped, and she instantly sank into the corn sea. The more she struggled, the faster she sank. Her teammates desperately grabbed her hands, but they couldn't resist the force of the sinking corn. As the corn was about to cover her head, another team member risked his life to untie the safety rope and jump down to save her. As a result, both were swallowed by the corn, and the scene was in complete chaos. At this point, the team leader decisively grabbed a cutting machine and began hacking at the steel plates of the granary. When the steel plates were cut open, the corn erupted like a volcano. The 2 buried team members and the trapped person finally saw the light of day. Corn was still flying around the barn, and screams could be heard from the neighboring community. Old Tom was picking apples while standing on a ladder when a marble flew over from next door and broke his water cup. The angry old man climbed up the ladder and saw 2 little rascals standing in the neighboring yard, still holding slingshots. "I'm confiscating your toys," Old Tom shouted angrily. But the 2 little rascals not only refused to admit their mistake, they also made faces at him. The old man, furious, threw their slingshots into the storage box. But the mischievous children quickly brought out something even more dangerous. They dug out a crossbow from the warehouse and started aiming at the target on the wall, completely unaware that old Tom had climbed back up the ladder. The children's father, upon discovering this, rushed out to stop them, but it was too late. A whistling sound was heard. The 911 operator heard screams on the phone and quickly asked for the address. When the fire department arrived, they were all stunned. An arrow had pierced old Tom's neck, but strangely, there was no blood coming out of the wound. The firefighters helped Tom sit down, carefully removed his hat, and gently pressed his neck. They then discovered something even more astonishing. It turned out that Tom had a tumor in his neck, which had caused the arrow to miss his vital organs. Old Tom was terrified, his face pale. The captain said not to worry. It looked benign, and he should just go to the hospital for a checkup. The 2 mischievous children who had caused the trouble had already run into the treehouse in fear. As the ambulance started, the radio rang again. This eerie house was filled with books and clutter, resembling a giant maze. The only way to enter the innermost room was through a passage filled with deadly traps. The residents were 2 mysterious white-haired old men. Today, the younger brother went out to buy food and triggered a trap, getting buried under a pile of collapsed books. The older brother frantically called for help. When the fire department arrived, they were all stunned. The neighbors said that the twin brothers never interacted with anyone. The older brother hadn't left the house in decades, and the younger brother had to circle the street 3 times to avoid being followed every time he went shopping. The front door was blocked, and when the fire department tried to break in through the windows, they found deadly traps everywhere. The captain was sweating profusely and could only ask the older brother inside to turn off the mechanism. To everyone's surprise, the older brother was blind. He trembled and said the only way out was to turn off the master switch through the front passageway. A firefighter crawled into the passageway, with a sharp chainsaw hanging above his head. If he touched that thin wire, he would be cut in half instantly. Under the old man's guidance, he set the antique clock to 11:11, and the electric saw finally stopped. When the firefighter crawled out of the passageway, the scene before him left him speechless. The 2 old men had been living in this hellish place for decades. The blind older brother cried and begged them to save his younger brother. However, The act of pulling back the curtains during the rescue enraged the old man. He roared that these security measures were to prevent thieves. Since his mother's death, he had never left this dark prison. The team members outside cleared away the piles of clutter like ants moving a house. When they finally dug out the buried brother, everyone gasped in horror, looking at his brother on the stretcher. The older brother trembled as he took his first steps in decades. When the sunlight first touched his weathered face, the old man smiled like a child. We all have such a dark house deep within us, filled with the chains of memories that imprison our true selves. But as long as we have the courage to pull back the curtains, the sunlight has always been waiting for us.